Republicans are using a 40-year-old policy to justify aggressive policing in Black and brown communities. Expected? Definitely. But there's plenty of evidence to show why the broken windows theory isn't actually effective. In 1969, Stanford University psychologist Philip Zimbardo abandoned two cars, one in a largely impoverished part of New York City and the other in a wealthy neighborhood in Palo Alto, California. It took only 10 minutes for citizens in New York to start vandalizing and stripping the car for parts, while on the opposite coast, the car was left alone for more than a week. It wasn't until Zimbardo and two of his graduate students smashed the car with a sledgehammer that California citizens followed the New Yorkers' lead and destroyed the car. At the time, Zimbardo concluded that the results showed how visible signs of neglect, such as broken windows, can lead to increased crime and how feelings of anonymity can lure even good citizens into bad behavior. Here's where things start to get muddled. Criminologists George L. Kelling and James Q. Wilson expanded on the topic 13 years later in an article for The Atlantic. Their take? Police officers should prioritize addressing minor offenses like smoking weed and evading subway fares to help prevent larger crimes from occurring. But as we've seen throughout the subsequent decades, and even more so recently with George Floyd, Elijah McClain, Trayvon Martin, Jordan Edwards, and countless others, law enforcement involvement in minor offenses, real or assumed, can lead to fatal endings. As New York City's newly elected mayor in 1993, Rudy Giuliani decided to give broken windows a try, starting by working with the police commissioner to reduce the roughly 250,000 people a day who are evading subway fares, according to NPR. In 2001, Kelling published follow-up research looking at the city's use of broken windows policing and deemed it a success. But a few years later, Columbia law professor Bernard Harcourt reviewed those findings and concluded that Kelling's study didn't consider the financial term mean reversion. Mean reversion basically means that even extreme spikes in stock prices will usually settle back down to the average level over time. A graph in Kelling's paper showed that the crime rate did indeed fall drastically in the early 1990s, but prior to the drop, there was a spike in crime. That pattern proved to be consistent throughout the graph. So just like gravity, what comes up must come down. Harcourt also pointed to another issue with broken windows, a tremendous increase in complaints of police misconduct. Things only got worse with the birth of stop and frisk, a policy that grew out of broken windows and gained traction in New York City following Michael Bloomberg's 2001 mayoral victory. Amid these flaws in the broken windows theory, everything else began to shatter, and 2 decades later, statistics show that these policies have contributed to the overpolicing of marginalized communities. A New York federal judge determined 10 years ago that the way the city's officers were using stop and frisk was unconstitutional. However, the judge held that the city could continue employing stop and frisk as long as changes were made and the practice was never fully terminated. The results of broken windows policing and stop and frisk show that sometimes simple answers may offer a false sense of safety, but it might just be time to think outside of the box.